So, let me ask you a question. Are you really in control of your life? That feeling you have of making choices, is it real? Or is it just a grand, beautiful illusion? Today, we're diving deep into one of the most mind-bending questions out there to try and figure out who or maybe what is actually in charge. I want you to think of your body as a ship, and your consciousness, well, that's the person at the helm, right? It totally feels like you're the one steering, you're making the turns, you're choosing the destination. But what if I told you that you might just be a passenger? A passenger who's just really, really good at convincing themselves they're the one holding the wheel. Okay, let's bring this down to earth. Picture this. You're standing in front of a vending machine. Your hand goes out, you press the button for coffee instead of tea. Simple. Feels like your choice, 100%. But what if I told you modern neuroscience is starting to suggest that this feeling of control, it's just a story we tell ourselves after the decision has already been made by something else? And that, right there, brings us to our first big stop, the pretty startling evidence from science that our brains make up their minds long before we consciously do.
You know, this whole thing really kicked off back in the 1980s with a scientist named Benjamin Libet. He had people do something super simple, just flex their wrist whenever they felt the urge. But what he found was wild. A spike in brain activity, what he called the readiness potential, popped up about half a second before the person even felt the conscious decision to move. It's like your brain starts the car and then, a moment later, sends a memo to your consciousness, which mistakenly thinks, hey, I started this car.
Now, if half a second felt a little unsettling, how about 7 full seconds? Yeah. A 2008 study using these powerful fMRI scanners took this to a whole new level. Scientists could literally see which button a person was going to press a whole 7 seconds before the person themselves had any idea. Think about that. Your brain's choice was already visible while your conscious mind was still, making a decision.
This leads us straight to this powerful idea called scientific determinism. The philosopher Spinoza had this great thought experiment. Imagine a stone falling through the air that suddenly becomes conscious. It would absolutely believe it was choosing to fall, right? It would have no idea about gravity or momentum pushing it along. The argument is that we're that stone. We're inventing this story of free will because we're totally unaware of all the complex biological laws that are really pulling the strings.
But okay, just when it feels like the case is closed, that we're all just living in a predictable clockwork universe, the totally bizarre world of quantum physics comes along and throws a massive wrench in the works. So you've got classical physics on one side, which basically says the universe is a predictable machine. If you could know where every single atom is, you could predict the future perfectly. It's all cause and effect. But then you have quantum mechanics, and it tells us that down at the tiniest levels, reality is just this fog of possibilities. An electron is literally everywhere and nowhere at the same time until someone looks at it. The act of a conscious observer seems to force reality to make a choice, and suddenly the future doesn't seem so fixed after all.
And this gets us to what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. I mean, we can explain how the brain works, right? We can map how neurons fire and signals travel, but we have absolutely no clue why any of this should create an inner world. Why do we feel the color red or the happiness from a piece of music? Why aren't we just super sophisticated biological robots processing all this data with no inner experience at all?
This raises a pretty radical question. What if the brain doesn't create consciousness at all? What if it's more like a receiver? Think about a radio. A radio doesn't create the music it plays. It just tunes into a signal that's already out there in the air. This idea suggests that maybe, just maybe, consciousness is a fundamental part of the universe itself, and our brains are just these incredibly complex antennae tuning into it.
So, on one hand, we have a brain that seems to be running on autopilot. On the other, we have a universe that seems to change when we look at it. Science kind of hits a wall here. So to go a little deeper, let's explore how a framework from Islamic philosophy offers a really fascinating way to bridge these two seemingly opposite worlds.
Check out this parallel. It's fascinating. What if that unconscious readiness potential that scientists see in the brain, what if that's the physical evidence of what philosophy calls destiny? You can think of it as the unstoppable flow of cause and effect, all the physical laws that govern our bodies and the world around us.
So in this way of thinking, that moment when we become consciously aware of a choice, that isn't the moment we create the choice. It's what's called the moment of acquisition. It's the instant where our consciousness grabs onto that pre-existing physical impulse and gives it intention. This is the point where we acquire the act, and that's what makes us morally responsible for it.
This whole idea is summed up beautifully in a profound Islamic teaching. Verily, actions are but by intentions. So even if the physical machinery of an action starts firing in our unconscious brain, it's our conscious intention that gives that action its moral and spiritual meaning. The impulse might be destiny, but our intention, that's our choice.
And this brings us to a really cool idea, a place where neuroscience and philosophy might actually shake hands. Maybe our real freedom isn't in our power to start actions, but in our incredible power to stop them.
Get this. Libet himself, the scientist who kicked off this entire debate, actually proposed this idea. He called it free won't. The theory goes that while all these impulses are bubbling up from our unconscious, our conscious mind has this tiny, tiny window, we're talking about 100 milliseconds, to act like a gatekeeper and just say no.
So let's break it down. Step 1, an impulse just appears, unconsciously, a flash of anger, a selfish thought. Step 2, consciousness wakes up to it. And then step 3, in that brief moment, the real choice is made. Do you let that impulse pass through the gate and become an action, or do you exercise your veto power?
And here we find another one of these amazing parallels. The scientific concept of veto power, or free will, lines up almost perfectly with the ancient spiritual concept of mujahadat o-nafs, which means the struggle against the self. Both of these frameworks are telling us that real freedom isn't about doing whatever pops into our head, but about having the strength to resist our own worst impulses.
Okay, so after looking at brain mechanics, quantum weirdness, and ancient philosophy, we're left with this one last fundamental question. What does this all mean for who we actually are at our core?
And it seems we're left with two really profound ways of seeing ourselves. Are we, on one hand, just incredibly complex biological algorithms, predictively reacting to our genes and our environment? Or are we something more? Are we a steward, a khalifa, a conscious being who's been given this unique ability to watch our own biological machinery and guide it with intention and a higher purpose?
This quote just captures that second vision perfectly. It suggests that you are not your brain. The brain is the incredible tool you've been given, but your spirit, your conscious awareness, that's the commander. And your responsibility, your real freedom, lives in that tiny but incredibly powerful space between an impulse and an action.
And so, we're going to end by turning the question right back to you. After looking at all of this, who is piloting your ship? Are you a beautiful, complex algorithm just running your pre-written code? Or are you a steward, given that divine spark of consciousness and the ultimate power to choose, the power of the veto? The choice, it seems, is yours to feel.